Trey. This is hour number 2 of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. And we were just treated to to an amazing hour of Facebook Live with the Director of African American Studies at the University of Arizona, Dr. Praise Zanenga. And now we get back to business here with my people's history of music and venturing into the rhythm sections of O Canada with one of the greatest bass players of all time, a guy who had to get out of Dodge to dodge the Vietnam War, but he was cooking the groove with Terry Clark and Jerry Hahn, who I interviewed and then lost the interview, and now he punished me by never doing an interview with me again. Interviewed John Handy. Don Thompson was rooted in just swinging, burning music, learning the rudiments all the way from swing to bebop into post-bop and thereabouts, and he has just continued to make a career playing melodic music and playing the song. Don Thompson, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, Jake, nice to be here, or nice to be there, wherever we are.
You're here. We're talking worldwide now, and
Cool.
It's an honor to connect with you, man. I wanted to just ask you a little bit about when you first, some of the bass players that you were getting off on in the 50s that were essentially playing the deep bottom that allowed the bebop rhythms to expand the vocabulary of jazz.
Okay, so when I first started to play, I actually did start, let me see, I started playing bass in about 1955, I suppose. God, that sounds like an awful long time ago.
How old were you at that time?
Yeah. I was 15. I was born in 1940. And I started playing bass when I was about 15. Yeah, that's about right. And the first guy that I really, really liked was Red Mitchell. And I had recordings of Red Mitchell I didn't have a ton of records, but the ones I liked the best, he always seemed to be the bass player. And then other records I wound up getting with Ray Brown, and so they became my two favorite guys, Red Mitchell and Ray Brown, for different reasons. But they were, as far as I was concerned, they were the two guys. Can
you explain what the difference is and what was appealing to about both of them to you?
Well, with Red Mitchell, I heard him first. I heard him the first time I heard him play was on a record with Hampton Hawes. It was called Everybody Likes Hampton Hawes.
Yeah, right. I know that.
And it had a alligator on the cover, right? You know the one.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, he played this solo. And I Remember You. And I just couldn't believe how pretty it was and how beautiful his melodies were. Plus, he had a killer bass, and he had a beautiful sound, and it was really beautifully recorded, too. Contemporary records. They were good recordings. And so I really liked the way he played. I liked the melodies in what he played, though. Because up until that time, I'd played, sort of fooled around. I mean, I played piano. I didn't know anything about it, but I did play the piano. And I played enough music that I knew that it was supposed to be melodic. And when I heard him play, I heard those beautiful melodies. I thought, this I really do like. And that's mainly, and plus he had a good groove, too. I like that. But there was the melodies and the sound. I think he had that great sound. And then I heard Ray Brown, and it was another different sound, but it was also killer, and the groove was amazing. And it wasn't his solos. His solos, I don't remember anything at all about Ray Brown's solos, as a matter of fact. But what I remember the bass lines were like Bach. They were so perfect and so melodic. That's what got me about Ray Brown. Plus the groove was just killer. And that sound, he had a beautiful sounding bass too. He had that old Italian bass. And so his sound got me, but it was the melodic flow of his bass lines that really got me. And then I started hearing other bass players, and not very many of them actually got me after that, because I was disappointed in most of the other bass players I heard. I must say though, I really did like Percy Heath. And I don't remember him ever. I know he did play solos, but I don't remember anything at all about them. But again, it was the sound and the groove and that time feeling, and
I dig,
and the melodic flow of his playing. Because Percy Heath, his lines were perfect too. And there was other guys. Wendell Marshall was another fantastic bass player, and there was a few other guys. But mainly it was Red Mitchell first, and Ray Brown after that, and then all those other guys.
Were you listening to like records like on Tampa, like from the Tampa label, like West Coast Bop with West Coast Jazz with guys like Red Mitchell, and Bob. There's a piano. I just got this killer quartet album on Tampa from '55. Red Mitchell on bass, Bob Envelson, I think.
Oh yeah, sure.
That stuff is, and then some cats playing piano and also like accordion, but it's just burning music, man. It's burning.
Yeah, so I've never heard that. I've never heard that record actually. I don't know which one you're talking
about.
It's
called Reflections in Jazz. That's what it's called.
Really?
Yeah.
I got to look it up.
It's on vinyl. Like it's burning stuff. And Red Mitchell, but are you? I guess from your not that you didn't hear it, but in hindsight, how do you? In your mind, how did you learn to find your individual voice? And what I mean by that is, how for peeps out there, for cats out there who are looking to not just lock the groove, but actually play melodically, how did you learn how to do that?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know, because I also played piano and vibes. And when you're playing piano, I mean, you play melodies. It's part of the gig. And when you're playing vibes, for me anyhow, because I only played 2 mallets. So it was all melody. Because I never did, I still don't play 4 mallets. Because I don't really like the sound of it unless it's Gary Burton. I don't like the sound of it, basically. But I love the melodies, especially like Milt Jackson was still is one of my heroes in life. And
Did he only play 2 mallets? Did he only play 2 mallets?
Oh yeah, he just played 2 mallets.
Wow.
And Milt Jackson, I mean, I played with him a few times actually. We did a few gigs together, and he's like one of the geniuses of all time, as far as I'm concerned, on any instrument. And so melodies was something it's just something I did. And so when I started playing the bass, because I played vibes and piano both before I played the bass, and so when I started playing bass, I wanted to play melodies. It's just that it was so doggone hard, because the bass is an impossibly difficult instrument to play. And so it's just what I was always faced with this thing where it seemed like almost anything I wanted to play, I couldn't play it on the bass. I could play it on the vibes, I could play it on the piano, but bass was just so hard. I just couldn't, it's just I didn't deal with the instrument. It took me a long, long time to actually get enough together on the bass that I could actually play anything that I really liked.
I mean, did you?
And it was.
Could you explain? Is there something definitive in your playing professional career where you kind of got to a point where you realized it was not impossible to do that on the bass?
Well, I'll tell you what first made me really think about it seriously, because I played a concert one time, and Terry Clark was in the band with me. We played a concert one night in Vancouver, and I can't remember the year even, but it was
at the Cellar. At the Cellar?
Oh no, this was a big concert. We opened up for Stan Getz, and we were the opening band for Stan Getz in his quartet. And at that time, it was Stan and Gene Tirico and Gary Burton and Joe Hunt, and that was the band. And during the course of the evening, they played Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars. And when Getz played the melody, he played something in the melody. He just changed 2 or 3 notes in the melody, but it was so beautiful the way he played it. It stuck in my mind, and as soon as I got home, I got my bass, and I thought, I bet I could do that. And I picked up my bass, and I actually figured out where it was. And this is a long time ago. I hadn't been playing. I mean, I hadn't really played that much bass at that point, so I wasn't a great bass player at all. But anyhow, I did figure out how to do it, and I realized, well, it is possible to actually play a melody on the bass. And then I just started going from there and figuring out, well, if I want to play this, what do I have to do? What do I have to work on to be able to play what I want to play? And I just sort of make little exercises and figured out, well, the thumb position is like an octave higher, that's all. And I figured out how to play some of what I played down low. I figured out how to play it up high. And I never did actually have any lessons. But I watched bass players I liked. I really watched them carefully to find out how their hands worked. And there was a great bass player that lived in Vancouver when I was a kid, and his name was Paul Ruland. He's dead now. He died a few years ago, but he was a really terrific jazz bass player and a really good classical bass player too, and plus being a composer and arranger. So I used to go wherever he played. I'd walk into the studios at CBC, because you could do that in those days, and I'd just sit right beside him in the studio while he was playing. and watch his left hand and listen to his sound, because he had a good bass. He had a French bass that really had a beautiful sound, and he had absolutely perfect technique.
Talking to yeah, go ahead.
And I remember sitting in the studio while they were recording, and I'd talk to him because they'd stop playing, and I'd ask him questions, and he was a really nice guy. And they sort of didn't mind in those days. I mean, you could never do that now, because you'd have to go through security and a metal detector and everything else to get in the room. But now, in those days, you could just walk in off the street, and they knew who I was. So they said, "Oh yeah, go on in." And so I'd be sitting I'd get a chair, and I'd sit right beside him in the studio. And one time they were playing a piece of George Russell's, and I was sitting there listening to him, and I thought, man, that is the greatest bass line, but it's so bizarre. And he said, oh, it's 12-tone, that's why. And he had a written-out 12-tone bass line, and he played it for me and explained to me how 12-tone music works, and how once you play this, see, you can't play it until you played all the other notes, and all that stuff. And then he'd play the bass line, and I'd listen to it. And another time, he had a blues that he'd written for the band. It was about a 12-piece band. And the whole first chorus he played by himself, up in the thumb position, in 4-note chords. Sounded like a classical guitar. I sat there listening to him.
Go ahead.
No,
keep
really.
going.
I mean, he did that. And it was like he was demonstrating the bass to me. And at this time, this is about 1962, maybe. And he's demonstrating what he could do on the bass just by playing this blues in 4-note chords, just like it sounded like a classical guitar playing. And he was a huge inspiration to me. And so whenever a good bass player, Freddie Schreiber is another bass player that you probably have heard of. And if you haven't, Freddie Schreiber was...
Is he still with us?
Oh, no, Freddie's died years and years ago. But he was a phenomenal bass player. And he used to come to Vancouver, and I'd watch him like he was a hawk. I mean, I just watched his hands, his left hand especially, because he could really play. And like, if you haven't got any recordings, you could find them. Because he made one really good record with Cal Traders band, the Black Hawk, I think, in San Francisco. But Freddie was a great bass player. He really was, and if he hadn't died, he would have been one of those legendary people like Scott LaFaro and all the other guys, because he was at that level. That's how good he was. Anyhow, Freddie, and so I got to know Freddie pretty well, and I played with him a couple of times. And again, that's basically the guys I would listen to, and then I would just try and figure out, now how the heck am I going to play what I want to play?
I wanted to read you this quote. I've been doing my radio show for 6 years now, and I interviewed John Handy back in April of 2011. This is what he said. Bobby Hutcherson joined my band in January '67. He said he really liked my band because we had done this version of Spanish Lady. He also heard us playing a Command performance in 1966 down in Watts. I was reluctant to go because our band was 3/5 Caucasian and the riots were going on. We were in New York when Bobby joined us. Don Thompson, Terry Clark were Canadian, and this was during the Vietnam War. They had to get out of here because they would have been drafted. Thompson played bass. Right. Thompson played bass with us until we went back to California. When we got back, that's when Bobby introduced me to Albert Stinson. Now, explain why you decided to even come to San Francisco. What gig did you have waiting for you when you left Canada to come down here to begin with?
Sure. And we worked with them. Terry and I played with them a couple of times in Vancouver. And like the first time he came up, it was really bizarre because I was supposed to play piano the first time.
I'm sorry, your phone cut out when you. Who was the person? I didn't hear.
Oh no, the first time John came to Vancouver.
Oh, John Handy. Got it. Okay.
I played piano.
My God.
Yeah, because I had a piano trio, and the three of us were booked just to back up this artist from the United States. It was one of those kind of things, a visiting artist in a local rhythm section. And what happened is that the bass player, who was a really good bass player too, but he was a student, he was in university, and after about 2 nights, the stress of working at night and trying to get through school and everything, and plus the music was really super hard. Anyhow, he got sick and he couldn't come in. He just basically quit. And so I told John, well, why don't I just play bass for the rest of the gig, and we can just do it as a piano or a pianoless band, a bass and drums. And at that point, I really wasn't a very good piano player. I mean, I was just sort of a high-ranking amateur, if you like. And John's music was literally light years beyond what I really understood. Because the day he came onto the first gig, it was the day after Mingus at Monterey.
That's right. He had just come from that, so it was like this daunting thing.
It was the very next day, and that's all he could talk about. he came in, bam, we tore it up at Mendoroy last night, and he had reviews and the pictures, and I thought, oh, jeez. So anyhow, after about 2 nights, I wound up playing bass, and we did the whole gig with just saxophone, bass, and drums. And I actually got through it pretty well on bass because I could play well enough on the bass, and I didn't have to voice all those chords that I didn't know and solo on all those changes and read all those funny parts. But I got through it good enough on bass that the next time John came back to town, of course, he had Freddie Red playing piano, and Michael White came up playing violin, and that's when the band sort of started.
Wow.
But
Freddie,
then,
by the way, is Freddie Red still with us?
I believe he is.
Yeah,
I
I need to,
because
I don't know, that is the most, can you explain, I remember Terry, in my interview with Terry, he talked about the rhythm section of Mingus and Danny Richmond and how it was just a powerful, swinging, burning rhythm section. And
oh, it was amazing.
You know,
yeah,
and
it really was.
And so I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the dynamics of those amazing rhythm sections of that time, Paul Chambers and Elvin, or, you know, it could have been you and Terry Clark. But, you know, ultimately, where was the vocabulary of that music? I know the music might have been light years ahead of where you were at that time, but you were able to you were able to hang in there. What was the vocabulary they were working? I interviewed Bobby Hutcherson before he left, and he said him and Charles Lloyd, they were really experimenting off of the traditional blues 1-4-5, the blues scale. But I wanted you to talk about that whole amalgam of music at that time, why it was so burning. People call it post-bop, but you were playing bass, and I just wanted you to riff on that.
Yeah. Well, let me see. I never actually thought about it all that much, frankly, at the time. I was just trying to figure out how to get through John's music, and because that really was it.
What made it progressive at that time?
Well, John's music. Well, his musical roots they were way beyond what most of the guys were playing, and his music was really advanced. And I mean, we wound up doing all kinds of stuff that most of the other bands actually weren't doing. We played free music that was actually, you know, it sounded more like it was coming out of Stravinsky than anything else.
Wow.
Sometimes.
Wow. Or
Or even different composer. We at one point in time, we actually, I don't know if Terry told you this, but Terry and I were driving to a rehearsal one time at John's house, and he put on the radio, and there was a live recording of a concert of a cello concerto by Penderecki. And we listened to that in the car. And it was so amazing when it was still going when we got to John's house, and then we turned on the radio in John's house and we listened to the whole rest of the concert, and there was other music besides Penderecki. There was a piece by Ligeti, and after we heard that stuff, then we had the rehearsal, and we had this one piece that John had written that it was all open form, free improvising, and that listening to that music completely changed the way we all played. We all went in like it was just like a huge jump up from what we'd been doing before, just after hearing that music of Penderecki's and the other pieces on the program.
Is there a way to talk about where you were, what you were doing before, as opposed to maybe the I don't want to say symphonic nature of what was the expansion from where you were to after that rehearsal?
Oh, it's just I don't know. I can't. It's hard to tell you that, but like I know that it just made us aware of things that we'd never even dreamt of before. Do you know the music? You know the
it's not my no, it's definitely not my bag at all. But I'm just this is fascinating stuff.
It's amazing, actually. And so
can you tell me what it is, by the way? I mean, just tell me the.
Oh, I can't. But like Penderecki's, I could never attempt even to analyze what he does or even talking about it. But
what era? What era was he though?
Well, he was. I think I can't remember when he died. It wasn't that long ago. I don't
okay,
suppose.
so he was a. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is.
He's super modern. I mean, he writes.
Yeah, I got it. I dig.
Yeah, he's super modern. I mean, his music sounds like it almost sounds improvised. In fact, I thought it was.
Right.
But if you look at his scores, I mean, the scores like he writes, in quarter tones and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
It's really totally out, but absolutely beautiful. It's really amazingly beautiful music. But it's really outward bound, and like when I heard that, I thought, well, wait, we could probably play like that. And because we all were sort of playing out anyhow. But I have to say, there was another person that made a huge impact on the music for just a short time, and that's a guitar player called Sonny Greenwich.
I do not know that.
Because, Sonny played in the band after, when Jerry Hahn quit, Sonny Greenwich is the guitar player that replaced him. And if you haven't heard Sonny, and John, I don't think John would argue with me too much about this, I don't think anybody ever played any better than Sonny Greenwich. I mean, Sonny Greenwich doesn't play anymore. He had a couple of heart attacks, and he hasn't played for quite a few years. But he was a fantastic jazz guitar player. And he had a spirit in his playing that is so reminiscent of John Coltrane that he could literally bring a room to tears with his playing. And in the Village Vanguard, he was in the band with Bobby Hutcherson. And when we played in the Vanguard, Sonny would routinely get standing ovations for his solos. That's how good he was. And it was a kind of playing that nobody had ever heard before. Absolutely original and absolutely beautiful. And he made a big difference to the band, too, because along with all that, he had a swing feel that was just scary. I mean, he really had a groove. So that was another guy that really made a huge impact. And even though he was only there just for a few months, he didn't stay in the band for very long.
So you come down to San Francisco after the gigs with Handy, and then were you immersed at all with some of the anything that was going on at Mills College? Some of these classical composers like Terry Riley and I don't know who else was down there, but it was just like this incredible music concrete was going on. I'm just trying to think about.
Oh yeah, there was.
Can you talk about any?
No,
yeah.
Well, the problem was we didn't have any time to do stuff like that. We were so busy with John because, like, in those days, we had a steady gig for one thing, which is unbelievable. But we worked in the club, a steady gig 6 nights a week for about 5 or 6 months. And so that doesn't leave very much time. Plus, with John, we rehearsed virtually every day. And so, like, when you rehearse every day and you play every night, there's no time for very much else. And so
can you just talk about what was going on around you, what was inspiring to you?
Well, there were some musicians in town there was really some good musicians around, and Denny Zeitlin was in San Francisco, and he's a giant musician.
Well, I've interviewed Denny. I've interviewed Denny twice. Yeah, he played at the Trident.
Yeah,
why don't you talk about the?
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, well, these are the guys that I was seriously influenced by. Denny and Charlie Hayden, of course, was playing with him, and so Charlie was a person I really liked. There was another bass player called Raphael Garrett. And Raphael's been dead for quite a long time, but Raphael, I really liked him. I really liked him as a person, and I really liked his playing too. He did all kinds of stuff that I spent time with him. He taught me stuff about the bass and playing that I just really didn't know and never understand. But do you know who he is? Have you heard that name?
No, but I'm curious about the Zeitlin.
Well, his name.
I'm not. No, the unsung cats. I dig. It's all good. I'm just curious about the Zeitlin and Hayden fusion that you were inspired by. I mean, if you could put that into what they were doing, because I mean that music. I've listened to that music. Fred Marshall was another cat.
Oh, Fred! I loved Fred's.
Can you talk about Fred Marshall, because he created his own instrument? I think the Megatar.
He was brilliant. He was a beautiful bass player and an incredibly creative guy, a really good composer too. And he was probably my favorite bass player there at that time. And I knew Fred enough to really like him too. And he's another guy that showed me all kinds of neat stuff about playing. And that band, they had that band with Noel Jukes, and I don't know if you know Noel. He's a beautiful.
I've interviewed Noel. I've interviewed them all.
Yeah.
I mean, no.
So you know all these cats.
Yeah, I know. I'm 39, but I've been woodshedding for 6 years, so I've interviewed all these cats. And I'm really just, I dig that you were busy with John, but I want you to talk about it specifically from that mid '60s. There was this incredible amount of growth. There was a lot of progressive classical music going on. I wanted you to talk about some of the stuff that you might have witnessed or that you were inspired by, because and music concrete too, because that was stuff that Roger Kellaway was working on the East Coast with Mel Lewis and Richard Davis.
Oh yeah, but I didn't know anything about that at the time. See, we were pretty insulated from everything, and so my main thing when I was there was just to play John's music, And I did listen to other guys, but I didn't go out of my way. But when guys would come to town, I would make a point to hear them. And I heard Coltrane a few times. Like he came twice while I was living there, and so I heard him both times, and that was, nothing, I don't think has ever affected me much more than that.
Why?
Because it was just the power in him, the power and that beautiful spirit in John and his playing that just, it's hard to describe, but other people will probably tell you the same thing. But there was just something about him and the way he was and the way he played. It was absolutely irresistible to me. And he and Alvin, the same thing. And that whole band, I heard the band with McCoy and Alvin and Jimmy Garrison. And then I heard the band later when it was Rashid Ali and actually Raphael Garrett, the guy, he was playing with them. And
right.
A bunch of different cats at that point. All kinds of guys played with them after that. But the band with Alvin and McCoy, and I only heard them play that one time. But it was an amazing experience.
Was it at the workshop? Was it at the workshop?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I wanted to ask you.
That's the time Terry played with them, actually, that night.
Terry, because Alvin got thrown in jail or something? What happened?
Oh, no, Terry, he just sat in. John asked both of us to sit in, if we wanted to sit in. And Terry sat in and played a set with Trey, but I couldn't play Jimmy's bass. I just on the break, before even, I just talked to Jimmy, and his bass was set up in a way that I couldn't even hold the strings on. They were so high. So I didn't want to play, and I didn't, but Terry played a set with him. Because Trey also, he was this super gentle, super nice person. He was so nice and friendly, and the fact that he just asked both of us if we'd like to sit in. I just couldn't believe it. So it was.
Yeah, I've interviewed Jimmy Cobb and people that played with Train when he was starting sort of that, going off the 12-tone scale and listening to a lot of Indian music and playing a lot of modal jazz, and a lot of sometimes women would stand up in the audience and say, "Make him stop! Make him stop!" And actually, a lot of white journalists coined his music at that time hate music. And
that's nonsense.
Well, I want you to. So, but I no. But and what I'm saying is this: I hope that I wouldn't have been one of those journalists. But I'm asking you, why was that wail, that cry, that what he was channeling? Why was it misunderstood? Because you looked at it as the most powerful, beautiful thing, and yet when you read the historical accounts of it, it didn't go over very well. Sometimes.
Well. Yeah, okay. This is a dangerous topic, if you want to know.
That's what my show is, man. That's what I've been doing for 6 years.
Well, first of all, the band with McCoy, that never happened with the band with McCoy and Alvin. I'm sure. I can't imagine that ever happening, because even when they were playing really, really out, I can't imagine anybody ever saying, "Make them stop."
Well, Jimmy Cobb said that. So, that went down. And
really? With Alvin Jones and McCoy Tyner? I can't imagine that.
Jimmy Cobb was on drums. Jimmy Cobb was on drums. It was before, Train.
Oh, this was a long time before.
It was
that's when the
early 60s. Early 60s.
Oh, okay. See, I never heard that band. But I never heard Train live until Alvin and McCoy were playing with them.
Right.
But even so, that just doesn't make sense to me. And
well,
so
if you listen to those albums, even today, I'm talking to a friend of mine, and younger cat, and some of that music is, it takes a while to get your ear around. And what I'm trying to get at is, I don't want to make it a dangerous subject, but what made it so visceral? How come you felt it more than you heard it? And how come it? That's the point.
I don't think I did feel it more than I heard it. I heard it too. I could hear, and at that point, Train didn't mystify me, like musically. What he was doing wasn't that mystifying. So I could hear it, I could understand it, I could relate to it, but it was way more than that, because there was a feeling that I just can't define. But all I know is that whenever he played, I've described it this way a couple of other times, but when Train played, and I'm not convinced that the band always knew what the heck to do with him, and not the Alvin band, but the band afterwards, I don't think they really knew what he was trying to do or how to play with him. But when he played, it was like the sun was always shining. But when he would stop, it would be like it would cloud over sometimes and get really dark. But when Train himself, I never heard him play in anything that just didn't sound beautiful to me, on any of the records or any of the bands or anything. And I don't know why that is. but there was something in him he was such a gentle, beautiful person to me, just in the couple of meetings that I had with him, that and his music just sounded like that to me, as far as I was concerned. I didn't hear any anger or hate or anything. I just heard it just sounded beautiful to me all the time.
Yeah, well, it's documented there in the early 60s especially that he took a lot of flack for actually branching off. And, Miles was bored to death of bebop and, post-bop, and so that's where he went off into sort of his own realm. But I'm just saying, in general, though, I wanted to ask you about because, there were... I've talked to some of the Merry Pranksters for the Ken Kesey's bunch, and they would wind up at the Jazz Workshop in '61, and Dizzy and Rassan were playing psychedelic jazz. It wasn't bebop, it wasn't post-bop, it was just totally psychedelic. And there are other cats from from the original Jefferson Airplane who, trained the horn never. It's funny you talk about that sun, the sun is shining kind of analogy, because Marty Ballin from the Jefferson Airplane was like, I saw Train one time. He went over to this urinal, which was on the side of the stage, or the bathroom. He took a piss, and he was still playing his horn. He went to the bar, and the horn never left his mouth. It never left his mouth.
Well, I'll tell you what it was like the first time I heard Train play. Okay.
Yeah.
I went early to the club. It was a matinee in the afternoon. I guess probably on Sunday or Saturday. Maybe it was Saturday. They had an afternoon matinee. So the matinee is going to start at 4:00. So John Handy's wife Nancy, the two of us, went down to the club early because we knew that it was going to be packed. So we went down, an hour and a half before. And of course, when we got there wasn't anybody. So we just sat right down in the front, right in front of the stage. I could touch the piano if I stood up. That's how close we were.
Wow.
But already, Train was practicing, and we could hear him in the band room behind the stage, in the workshop. The band room was right behind the stage. We could hear him practicing. And he just played and played and played and played, and he never stopped playing until exactly 4:00. And none of the other guys were even there yet. So at 4:00, he came walking out, and he's still playing. And he just walked out, and he was playing by himself on the stage now. And finally, McCoy came in and came up to the piano and started to play with him. And they were playing Naima. And they played Naima for, quite a while before Jimmy and Alvin showed up. And then they all played Naima for about the next half an hour. And then, but he had been playing for God knows how long before we came in. And it was...
Yeah. So, was that
amazing?
Yeah, that was something that you had never really witnessed?
Well, no, it's just clear that what he did is he played the saxophone, and the music he was obsessed with it. He was clearly obsessed with the music, and that's what he did. He just played all the time. And when we were there, he never stopped. Like you say, he just played all the time. But then later when the band was Rashid, he didn't play all the time because he had all these guys sitting in. Because that's the other problem. He was such a lovely guy that he just would ask guys to sit in. He had 2 or 3 bass players playing on the stage with him, with Rashid and his wife was playing piano and Little Rock was playing tenor and all that. Anyhow, he had 2 or 3 bass players, and when they took a break, he asked me if I wanted to get my bass and play. And I looked up and said, "You already got 3 guys playing bass," and so I didn't. I couldn't imagine how I could contribute anything. So I said, "Oh no, thanks," and I didn't play. But he would ask everybody, and most of the guys. There'd be tons of horn players sitting in and playing, but meanwhile, none of them were playing all that much, and then that's when it was like a big mess. But then Train would finally stand up and he'd play, and it would just be so beautiful you couldn't stand it. But then he wouldn't play very long there because there was all these other guys, and then when he stopped, it would just turn into all that other stuff. And so at that point the music I didn't like it very much. But whenever he actually played himself, it was amazingly beautiful.
We're talking to Don Thompson, and I'm just so glad I was able to extract that memory from him. Was it a lesson in true democracy? Did it get too democratic later on? Is that what you're kind of getting at? Where there were two...
Well, that's a funny... I never would have thought of it like that, but maybe he was just too nice.
He was too nice. Now, so, the truth is that, I wanted you to talk a little bit about, if you could, your concept of, the ultimately how younger cats, if they were looking to unplug, there's such a saturation of material on YouTube. There are, Lord knows, there are probably music schools now with Don Thompson bass books. I don't know that for a fact, but Pat Martino books.
Oh God, I hope not.
And here's the point: is that
against...
I want you to talk about the street scholar mentality of learning your craft. That's it, because you guys, as far as I'm concerned, my generation and my daughter's generations, it is a pay-to-play mentality. The idea, not necessarily in Canada per se, but in this country, it is now. Dizzy Gillespie was looked at, maybe wasn't paid, but he was looked at in the same way as a lawyer or a doctor was, as a musician. Okay, and you had gigs that people were paid for those gigs, and maybe they were paid in junk, but it didn't matter. The point is there were places to play. I want you to just talk about that street scholar mentality, because that's where all the individual sound came from, and that's why you can't tell who anybody is today, because it's just a chop shop now.
Well, they all study out of the same books. They all study with, you put 40 saxophone players in a room with a teacher, and he says, okay, get out the book and turn to page 46, and we're going to work on that today. And so you get all the cats playing the same things. I don't know. Schools probably do more harm than they do good. The best I think is the best a school can do is actually not screw up the students and actually inspire them to figure out something for themselves. Because one thing I do know, that almost everything I can do that's any good is stuff I figured out myself.
What can you give an example?
Well, just the things I know about how to play melodies on the bass. I've spent hundreds of hours, literally, and I still do, on the bass, figuring out how I can play a melody that doesn't sound like a bass solo, for instance. The last thing I ever want to hear a bass player play is a bass solo.
I dig.
Like nobody would ever talk about Charlie Parker and say, man, what a great alto solo. And most people wouldn't listen to Art Tatum and say, man, that's a great piano solo by Art Tatum, or a great piano solo by Keith Jarrett. Keith's one of my heroes, incidentally. I must say that he's one of my favorite people in the world. But nobody would ever say that. Boy, Keith Jarrett played a killer piano solo. But like too many bass players, they can't talk about bass solos. Scott LaFaro's a bass soloist. Well, I really like Scott LaFaro too. But I don't want to sound like a bass player. I just want to play music. And so how can I play something that doesn't sound like a bass, but just sounds like music? So somebody listening to it, hey, that's a nice solo. They won't say, wow, this cat played a good bass solo there.
Well, let's see.
I hear bass solos. I hear bass solos all the time.
Do you feel it's just, to me, it's like...
you know what I mean?
Well, no, I dig. This is really cool. Let's take a listen to this music and see if there's any relevance to what you were just talking about, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, brought to you by the Pretzinger Agency of Allstate Insurance, the Jewish Community Center of Southern Arizona, the Jewish Federation of Southern Arizona, and we thank them for their support so we can play never-ending bone solos like that for Don Thompson. I mean, that's the point, is that, can you talk about how you as a bass player, have to play the song in that sense, because there were so many ideas being sequenced by Rosalino. That wasn't a 1 minute, 2 minute solo. That thing was stretching out. It's still going. How did you?
And but the thing is, it's relevant to what I was talking about, because Frank Rosalino didn't play trombone solos either. I mean, he just played solos. But the thing about Frank is, first of all, he could play anything on the horn. I mean, he had more chops than anybody. But also, he knew the music so well, and it was so easy for him that he could play that tune all day until he actually had to take a break to get something to eat or something, because he never ever would run out of things to play, because he just knew it so well. And I think the problem, like we were talking earlier about the problem with the young guys in school. Because, most of the guys I know that are teaching, and I had the same problem when I was teaching. I've stopped now, but when I had taught for a long time, you can't get students interested in learning tunes. They just don't seem to want to take the trouble to learn a tune. But with Frank, I mean, he'd been playing I Thought About You probably for the last 40 years. And so, he knew that tune backwards. It wouldn't matter what key it was in, or if it was faster or slower. It just wouldn't make any difference, because he really knew the tune.
How did you do you feel like having a deep bag of songs? I dig. I mean, I think a lot of younger cats don't have a deep bag and they don't go back far enough. But being that you had a deep bag, you were able to play the song, and you didn't need to do a bass solo. I mean, you were playing the song.
I don't know if I played a bass solo on that track or not. I just can't remember. But it wouldn't matter, because no, we just play the song. I mean, that's basically what it is. But you don't just play the song, because the responsibility of the bass player is to make the music succeed. Basically, I mean, everything else, nothing else is more important than that. The music has to succeed, and the bass player, almost more than anybody else, can either make it sound good or completely demolish it. And so, like for me, it's just a constant question of what's the best note to play right now. What's the best thing to do right now? Because you listen to everything that's going on, and then you say, well, I know the tune, I know what key we're in, and I know this tune. Now, what's the best thing to do right this minute to make this thing work? And it's always that's the biggest issue. Nothing else really is any more important than that. But like for the guys, if you don't know the tune, then you're sunk. And most of the young guys I know, I mean, they're actually learning tunes here, because I mean, there's some really good musicians in Toronto, and like what in Toronto, it's something that you're expected to be able to do, is to play tunes, and so they're actually getting pretty good. Some of the young guys are actually getting really good, but an awful lot of them, they just don't care. They say, well, hell, I just got my degree, and Terry, I don't know if Terry Clark would have told you this.
Yeah.
But
Go ahead.
One time. Now check this out. One time, Terry Clark called me. He says, I want to hire you for a gig. And the gig was at a club where they're going to do a surprise birthday party for a guy that was a disc jockey on the radio. And so Terry hires me to play piano, and he hires a couple of his students from where he's teaching, a bass player and a saxophone player. And so we're all hanging out on stage, and there's somebody's over at the door waiting for this cat to get out of the cab so we can play Happy Birthday as soon as he walks in. And so they finally we're waiting, and the guy comes running. He's here. The cab's just pulled up. Get ready. And so I said, okay, you guys, here's what we're going to do. Happy Birthday, we're going to start in F, and we're going to go through the cycle, one chorus each, until we get back to F again. And so the door opens, and the guy comes in, and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, and I counted off, and the bass player and the saxophone player didn't know Happy Birthday. Wow. They couldn't play it. And it was the screw-up of the century, because, like, here, this is a surprise birthday thing, and the guest of honor shows up, and the two guys don't know Happy Birthday. But then after it was very embarrassing, actually. Terry he was not happy. And when it was over, when that was finished, finally we said, okay, let's play some tunes. And so then we played Invitation, and they tore it up. They nailed it. And then we played a couple of other things, probably including Giant Steps. They sounded great. But Happy Birthday, they did not know.
What is that?
That's
yeah.
because they just hadn't, it never occurred to them to learn it. But at least they knew a few tunes. But a lot of the guys, they don't know any tunes. They show up for the gig, and they all get out their iPad, and then they say, okay, what do you want to play? And they say, well, let's play, what is this thing called Love? And they say, well, wait a minute. And then they get the chords on their iPad, and they put it on the music stand, and they play the changes to what is this thing called Love. They don't know the melody, but they got the chords. And so that's what they do. And they just don't go to the trouble to actually learn the tune.
Can you talk about, I mean, I'm doing it, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I'm actually producing a film documentary on Stan Getz, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about the stone genius of Bird, Getz, Chet Baker, and a whole host of others who basically just had natural gifts, and they could play every song in every key. And so they understood their entire instrument, and there was none of this fidgeting around with trying to get, this, that, and on the stage with the technology. And it was the feel. Can you talk about the stone genius of those street scholars?
I don't know how it works, and this is a good question because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Mm-hmm. How does Charlie Parker, where does somebody like Charlie Parker come from? Or Stan Getz, because there's another guy. Right. I worked with Getz only once, I guess.
I'm sorry. Can you identify when you worked with it? Tell me about when you worked with him.
We did a television show together in about 1963 or 64, something like that, I guess. And I never played with him again after that. I had a chance to play with him, but it never happened. And then I only met him off and on a few times. So I didn't know Stan, and I never ever met Chet Baker. I never heard him play live. So I don't know much about Chet Baker. But Charlie Parker, I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours, and I've got tons and tons of records, which I've heard many, many times. So, but even so, where does that genius come from is a good question. But again, with Charlie Parker, I have to say that it's a feeling that gets me, because there's lots of alto players that can really play, but they don't have the same feeling. And so they don't get me the same way. Sonny Stitt sounds a lot like Charlie Parker a lot of times. And when you listen, like, he played a lot of the same stuff, and he sounds fantastic, but I don't feel the same way I do when I listen to Charlie Parker. When I hear Charlie Parker play Just Friends, or when I hear him play Old Folks, and I hear that thing he plays going into the bridge of Old Folks, I just think, oh, geez, that's so beautiful, I can't stand it. And in fact, the thing on Old Folks is so amazing that I actually learned that on the bass. And I've never done that with very many people. There's a couple of things that Charlie Parker played that I actually learned on the bass. In his solos, just phrases. And they did the same thing with John Coltrane. And like I said, I did the same thing with Stan Getz on that tune, because I just had to play it. It was so pretty. And that doesn't happen with me with very many people. Sonny Greenwich, the guitar player I was talking about, he's one of those guys. He can basically, and he's totally self-taught. Yeah, no, most of the time he doesn't know what key he's playing in. But you can't call a tune in any key that he can't play. It just doesn't matter, because he's got that kind of mind and that kind of genius. It is completely self-taught, though. He's never had a lesson in anything, guitar, music, or anything.
Wow.
But it's hard to imagine where it comes from. And Sonny, again, it's a feeling. And John Handy, I'm sure he would tell you the same thing, because Sonny's got a feeling nobody else has got.
And then part of the problem is the stifling of the culture and the lack of, you just made a very, very salient point there. But it's the idea of, when you strip the human soul out of music, and you're copying and pasting this guitar solo into this, and there was a brotherhood, there was a community, there was a communal feeling, and it was a tribe. And when you strip away that humanity and it becomes digital, the music becomes very sterile. And then younger cats like my daughters, they don't know what it means to feel the music. They can't feel it because there's no humanity in it. That's part of the crisis.
That's true. Yeah.
And
well, there are some. There are some young guys that I hear every now and then. I hear a younger player. Well, actually, for me, anybody under 50, anybody under 60 is a younger player. But like I do hear guys that I do like. I must say, there are some guys around. I'm not going to go into naming them, but I do hear guys every now and then I like. But most of my people I like are over 70 years old. Even Keith Jarrett, obviously, Chick Corea and Herbie, just to name some piano players, and then Wayne Shorter. People. Those are the cats I really like, and I don't hear very many of the young guys that get me the way those guys. I love Wayne Shorter. Incidentally, I mean, he's a person I really, really do like, and I really like Joe Henderson too. I mean, he was another cat I really liked.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to play with him one time.
I want to say this. We have to pick up and do part 2. We have a lot more to do, but my show is out of time now. We cooked through an hour here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. We've been cooking for 54 minutes approximately, and I had a ball. And but let's reach. I'll reach out to you this weekend. We'll set up a time to do part 2. I've interviewed Chuck Rainey and Spider Webb, Bernard Purdy, Steve Gadd, all the rhythm sections. I'm not even doing justice. All the section cats, and to be able to talk to you and Terry as one of the consummate, melodic rhythm sections of Canada just continues to enrich myself. And like I said, I mean, I've interviewed everybody from Noel Jukes to Jerry Granelli to Mike Clark to Garrett, everybody. So now you're part of it, and I really had a ball, man. Well, I really can't thank you enough.
It's too bad you couldn't talk to Sonny, but Sonny Greenwich doesn't answer the phone. He just doesn't answer the phone. But Sonny Greenwich is the most fascinating person, and you'd really like to talk to him.
Do you talk to him? He doesn't answer your calls?
But I email him, and we do that. But Sonny Greenwich is a one of a kind.
Yeah,
genius.
We'll try to put it together.
If you go on YouTube and look up Sonny Greenwich Time Space.
Much love, Mr. Thompson. We'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
Right.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye-bye then.
It's a legendary day here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Heard from Dr. Praise Zanenga. And what an enlightening experience that was. And then just a titanic bass player in his own right. Don Thompson, Canadian cat, and well accomplished. We'll be back next week with the Jake Feinberg Show. More editions, more fun. Until then, we're going to listen into the PTSD show. And have a great day. Peace.